The Bible in Isaiah 53:6 says this about us and about God. Check this out. It says, "We all, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own, and yet the Lord has laid on him the sins of us all." We're going to be talking about that kind of themes today with sheep and shepherd kind of idea, and a lot about who God is and who we are in relations to him as we talk about our Psalm series. Now that song that they just sang, do you guys know what Psalm they're singing about there? Psalm 23, okay. And how many of you would say that you have at least some degree of familiarity with Psalm 23, okay? Yeah, that is exactly why I was intimidated about this passage today, because I'm like, what can be said about Psalm 23 that hasn't already been said? But then as I dove into it and began to study, I'm just like, oh, there's so much good stuff. And so I'm excited for what God has for us today. Again, it's a psalm about how God is our shepherd and we are sheep. Shepherd is a great word here. And notice it doesn't call God the truth or love or whatever. It's too narrow of definitions those are. It says he's our shepherd. It's this all-encompassing definition of who he is. And then it calls us sheep, which essentially means we're dumb. All right? Yes, I just called us all dumb, you, me included. In fact, a sheep is probably the dumbest animal on the planet, and the description often fits us, doesn't it? But here, check this out. The more we realize that we're sheep, I think the more that we are going to be able to rely on God, the good shepherd in our lives. So I'm excited about today. And we are like sheep, and we're kind of dumb sometimes. And it reminds me of one of the best comedies of all of the 90s, the show Dumb and Dumber, okay? Anybody out here has seen Dumb and Dumber before, okay? Yeah, it's a great movie. Just to remind us of how dumb these guys are and how dumb we are sometimes. I got a few quotes. The main actors, you've got Jim Carrey, who is Lloyd, Jeff Daniels, who is Harry in the movie. And just go over a couple scenes here. One of the ones I love is when Harry is driving the dog van that they have, and a police officer comes up next to him, and he's like, "Pull over." And Harry looks back at him, and he goes, "No, cardigan." But hey, thanks for noticing, all right? Thanks for noticing that, officer, all right? Or another time when Lloyd comes rolling up in this little mini scooter thing, and it's wobbling, and it's backfiring, and Harry just has this look of disgust on his face. And he's like, "Where'd you get that thing?" And Lloyd, he's just like super proud of himself, super excited. He's like, "I traded it for the van, straight up." And Harry looks back at him, and he's like, "You know, Lloyd, just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this and totally redeem yourself." Like, he's super pumped about the new scooter that they've got. Or maybe my favorite quote of all in the movie is when Lloyd is trying to figure out if this girl likes him or not and if their relationship has a future or not. And he's like, "What do you think are the chances of a guy like me and a girl like you," kind of a thing, you know? And she's like, "Not good. Like 1 in a million, not good." And he just gets this look at her, he pauses, and he's like, "So you're saying there's a chance, all right? 1 in a million. These guys are dumb. It's a funny movie, all right? And it's kind of how we are. God, he is this amazing shepherd. We're these often dumb sheep that go our own way, do our own thing. And we're going to learn about that today. Now, I know that probably none of you know very much about shepherding, which is great because I studied it a little bit, so I know just enough more than you to make me sound like the expert today, okay? But somebody who knows a ton about shepherding was a guy named David. David was Israel's greatest king of all time. He grew up as a shepherd boy, and he would have known a lot about sheep, a lot about himself, and a lot about who God is. And so out of that, he writes this amazing psalm, and it goes like this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." All right, by the end of the morning, in the next 30 minutes, you're going to be experts on what all this stuff means, okay? We'll start out in verse 1. It says this: "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing." And I want to camp out on those first two words there for just a few minutes, the Lord. And I want to ask you guys, is God even worth it? Is he worthy of you calling him your shepherd? Is he worthy of you placing your complete trust and faith of your life in his hands? You know, I think our view of God is often too finite. It's too human, and because of that, we sometimes have a hard time putting our complete and utter trust in him. And so I just want to remind us of a few things that God is. God, he is all-powerful. He's all-knowing. He's everywhere present. God, he is the way, the truth, and the life. God, he is your creator. And he is the one who stoops down from those positions that he has and says, I want to have a relationship with you. And wow, the amazing sense of purpose and meaning that gives to our lives is just so cool. That's who God is. How big is your God? I wonder that this morning. Well, just last week, my family and I, we went tent camping in Colorado. Are you guys with me? Like, shouldn't we totally move the mountains of Colorado to Omaha, right? Wouldn't that be good? Or either that or the beaches. I'll take one or the other, or both would be fine. All right, we just need something. I love Omaha, but we need those things. All right, but we were camping above, almost like 2 miles above sea level. And it's just beautiful there if you've been there, right? I mean, you've got the mountain views and the streams and the lakes, and it's just amazing. You've got the animals. We saw a male moose up there. We saw elk. At one point, we're doing a hike, and not even 10 feet away from us is this elk on the trail. And we're like, kids, get on the other side of us. Like, we're going to protect our kids from, like, this elk that would attack us or something, all right? But we saw these elk. We saw bighorn sheep. We saw mountain goats. We probably saw my favorite animal up there, the yellow-bellied marmot, okay? Isn't that just an awesome name for an animal? Yellow-bellied marmot, all right? But it's amazing when you're up on the mountains, on the nights that were clear, you look up at the stars, and they just spread out before you, and you just get a small glimpse of a little bit about what God is like. And I was reading this past week how many stars there are in our universe. And of course, you know that there's not 7 stars. There's not 7 with 1 0, not with 2 zeros, not with 7 zeros amount of stars, not even 7 with 16 zeros after it amount of stars. In our universe, the ones that we found, there are 7 with 22 zeros after it amount of stars that we can see. So that's 7 billion trillion stars. Doesn't that sound like a word that like a kid would use in kindergarten? You know, he's like fighting with someone in the playground. He's like, oh yeah, well my dad's bigger than your dad. He can like lift 7 billion trillion pounds, right? Just this made up number. No, it's a real number that talks about how many stars we have. And yet God, who made all of this, stoops to say, I want to be your shepherd. Will you follow me as my sheep? Man, it's amazing. He is the Lord, and he's our shepherd if we choose to call him that and to make him that. Can you say of your life, I follow you, God. I've put my will under your will, and I want to make you the shepherd of every part of my life. The verse goes on to say that I lack nothing, verse 1 says. Now, this is a statement of a sheep who is completely under the care of his amazing shepherd, right? Now, for those of you, let me give you a tip. If you're interested in being horrible at interpreting the Bible, you're going to want to listen to what I say next, okay? What you can do is you can take that phrase, I lack nothing, and verses like it completely out of context, and you can make it say exactly what you want, and you can make it say, I lack nothing, meaning I have everything I want right when I want it, and God is going to provide it for me. That's one horrible way that you can interpret that verse. But if you want to be faithful to what Scripture is really saying there, you know that verse doesn't say the Lord is my ATM. It doesn't say the Lord is my wish-granting genie. It's not, I have everything I want all the time, therefore I lack nothing. No. It's, I have God, therefore I lack nothing. I have everything I need. I wonder if your relationship with your shepherd is so close that you would say, I've put my will under his will so much that that's the only thing I desire anymore in life, so that if God's will is done in my life, no matter what that looks like, how hard or easy that is, I'm happy with that. I lack nothing when I'm in that place, and that's what I want for every moment of every day. God says, trust me as your Lord, and as you do, you will lack nothing. It's not just a nice statement. It's not just something fun we say in church. It's really true. Try living your life that way. Verse 2 says this, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me besides quiet waters. Now, have you ever tried to get a sheep to lay down? I found that other than just like making a sprint at them and diving and tackling them to the ground, it's really, really hard, okay? I've never actually tackled a sheep. That'd be fun, though. But in fact, I've heard it's impossible. 4 conditions have to be met to get a sheep to lie down. One is they've got to be free from fear. They've got to be free from bumping into other sheep. Aren't you excited to learn all this about sheep today, right? But they can't be bumping up against other sheep. They've got to be free from flies and parasites, and they've got to be free from hunger, all right? Sheep, they're pretty picky, right? All these conditions, and then they'll lie down. In a flock that's restless, that's discontent, that's agitated all the time and can't lay down and rest, it's not going to produce good. It's not going to be a good flock. And you know, the same is true of us for people. Like, we need rest. We're designed that way, but our tendency, right, is to always avoid rest, to always be filling our lives with distraction. There's always this constant competition going on. We're trying to keep up with the Joneses, and so we have to have this frantic pace of life. We got to buy all these things so that we can have what everybody else has. And there's this struggle for self-promotion and self-recognition that we're always fighting to lift ourselves up a little bit higher than maybe we are. And that struggle takes place in schools, takes place in office buildings, takes places even in our own church, where we just want to make ourselves the top sheep wherever we go. And of course, all of that fighting and struggling, it hurts people in the wake of what we do. And Psalm 23:2 comes along and says, no, he makes me lie down in green pastures. Doesn't that sound a lot better than all the struggling that we tend to do with our lives? You know, I think in 2015, something that would separate us as followers of Jesus from everybody else is just a sense of contentment in our lives. When everybody else is going crazy, wild, super busy, overcommitted, that they look at our lives and they see us as just content with what we have in our shepherd and God himself. That we wouldn't be complaining about others, that we wouldn't be grumbling about our circumstances, that we wouldn't be filling our lives with possessions and busyness, but instead we would learn to say no and to rest and to find what we need in God himself, because God is a place of peace. And then it says that he leads me besides quiet waters. Now, I learned about sheep that they're like 70% water, which I think we are as humans too, but so they have to have a lot of water to keep replenishing that. And sheep, being dumb as they are, they will get that water from wherever they can. If there's not a good stream that's clean, well, then they'll just settle for a pothole. Even if it's filled with like murky, stagnant, parasite-infested water, they'll just keep going back to that, even though it's not something that's good for them. And something else that's interesting about sheep is that even though they need so much water, they can go months on end without having to take a drink. Here's how that works. If they get up early in the morning, there's dew that drenches the grass, and if they get that grass in them with that dew on it, then they can go months without having to actually drink water. A good shepherd rises early and gets his sheep grazing so that they can find nourishment from that dew-drenched grass. You know, a few years ago, I began to really study some of the heroes, some of the giants of the faith, to see what their lives look like. And as I began to take a look at them, I noticed there was this common theme in all their lives. There was this depth of spiritual life that they had that always came out of a quiet time with God each morning, alone and still and waiting to hear their master's voice. And like sheep that would eat out of this damp, dew-filled grass in the morning, their mind and their souls are renewed by spending time with God every day in the morning in a way like this. And you know, the sad thing is, as Christians, we have that available to us, but instead of grazing on that dew-drenched grass, we settle for a light snack here and there, a prayer in our car on the way to something, instead of really diving into what God is calling us to do and who he wants us to be. And the sad truth is that we try to find that nourishment that we desperately need in other things that are maybe really harmful, maybe things that aren't as harmful, but if we're not finding our nourishment in God, they all, in the end, become harmful. From travel to sports, from hobbies to jobs, from drugs and alcohol to misplaced sexuality, from how much time we spend on our phones and media trying to find some happiness or satisfaction. I mean, have we ever done any of those things? We've probably enjoyed some of those things, but have we ever really been left fully satisfied by any of those things? And in the midst of all this struggling, Jesus invites us to follow him, that he's going to lead us beside quiet waters, that our thirst would become satisfied. Verse 3 says this, is that he refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Now hold on, we've just been talking the first two verses about all these great blessings that the sheep have, right? They lack nothing. They've got green pastures. They've got all the quiet waters that they need. Why would a sheep in those situations need refreshing of his soul? Well, here's what happens to a sheep whose needs are met. They lie down. That's a good thing. That's an okay thing. But they begin to get more comfortable in that lying down position. And what will happen is they'll lay down on their side. As you can picture it, their feet are sticking out to the side, and they get even more comfortable, and their feet just begin to slowly kind of creep up more and more, and then they get to the point where their center of gravity totally flips, and now all of a sudden they're laying on their back, stuck in a position that looks like this. And there's literally absolutely nothing that they can do to free themselves from this position. In fact, if a shepherd doesn't come and flip them back over, the sheep will literally die. Sometimes on a hot day, it can be like 3 hours later, and if the sheep is there for just 3 hours in that condition, they will die. Well, not to be outdone by the dumbness of sheep, we have a tendency in our Christian life just to seek comfort, to seek rest, to seek places where we don't have to get out of our comfort zone, where we don't have to depend on the Holy Spirit's power to do something through us. We try to run from self-discipline in any situation that would cause any sort of pain in our lives. We like to basically just play it safe and be comfortable so often in our Christian faith. You know, some weeks ago, Pastor Mark stood right here on this platform, and he issued the Molly Challenge. And he's like, hey, anybody who wants to take this challenge, go ahead and raise your hand. And now you guys are going to think less of me. I'm not necessarily proud of this as I say this, but as a pastor, here's the struggle going on in my mind. I'm thinking, okay, as a pastor, I'm supposed to be like super gung-ho about this and excited, the Molly Challenge. I'm a leader in this church, you know? But the other part of me is like, I know what is in that tube, and I am not interested in doing what's in that tube. Like, I will tell a stranger about Jesus for God. I will take 200 high school students for a whole weekend on a retreat for Jesus, but I do not want to sell something for Jesus, okay? I am not interested in that. And so in this moment where Mark's talking about this, I look down the aisle of my row where I'm sitting, just right back over there in this service, and to make sure everything's okay, and my kids are all excited with their hands up, right? And before I know it, my oldest daughter, she's literally up on the stage right here, right in the front middle, like tube in the hand. It's on the video screen so everybody can see her. It's on the internet for the whole world to see. We are committed as a mock family to the Molly Challenge at this point. And I'm just like, no, it's too late at this point though. And so we did what any spiritual person would do when we got home from church. We grounded our kids for volunteering our family for that moment. No, but eventually we said, hey, what are we doing? Just kind of complaining, kind of like, how are we going to do this? You know, and we said, why don't we, I don't know, try praying about this? That wouldn't be too bad of an idea. And we began to look at it we began to look at it as a way for my wife and I and our family to get out of our comfort zone and to depend on God for something that to do that he could only do, not that we could do. And so we began to get ideas, and we said, hey, let's do a lemonade stand. Now, keep in mind that like a year ago, my kids did a lemonade stand, same location in our front yard, and in 3 hours, they raised $30. 20 of that was from their grandma, I think, okay? And so we're like, I don't know how this is going to work, but we prayed. We made these signs that said lemonade for Africa. Like, who can resist that and drive by that, right? But we advertised on a neighborhood website that we have, and our kids worked really hard. And check this out. In 4 hours, we more than quadrupled the $100 that we started out with. I mean, it was such an amazing thing. And it was just cool because we were in this place of dependence on God. And my wife and I looked at each other afterward, and we said, why do we do this every time? Like, we're just dumb, right? Like, why didn't we just trust God from the beginning to do something cool through this? To do something that in our strength raised $30, and his strength raised over $440. And I tell you that to encourage you because even one of your pastors, one of the leaders of your church would say, this thing isn't easy, but that's a good place to be when we're there because it puts us in a place of dependence on God, and that's where we want to be as followers of Jesus. You know, sheep, they will continue to graze in the same land. They will continue to walk the exact same paths over and over until they've literally destroyed the whole land to where it can't produce any more good food for them anymore. And we're just like that as humans, but our tendency is to get comfortable, do the same thing over and over. But when we step out, when we volunteer in new areas, when we give to new depths, when we trust God to multiply money for the country of Mali, when we tell other people about Jesus, when we pray the prayer, God, your will be done in my life, and we really mean that, it's amazing what God does in us and through us when we're in a place where only He can work. He refreshes our souls. He does stuff in others. And check this out. His name is lifted up. Isn't that what we want from our lives, right? His name to be lifted up. Well, the verses continue. In verse 4, it says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, a good shepherd, what he does by the time that it's summer and really hot is that he takes his sheep to distant meadows high up in the mountains because that's where the best grazing land is in the summer. But on the way to those best grazing lands, there's valleys that they have to walk through to get there. There's dangerous mudslides and melting snow, and there's predators along the way, and there's poisonous weeds, and there's all kind of things, of valleys, you could say, that are there as an obstruction for the sheep. You guys know who've been hiking in Colorado at all that you don't just go to the top of any mountaintop. There's some valleys, and there's some dips and some hard points that you have to take to get there. And in this verse, it says, not that we will avoid valleys, not that even we will stop in the valleys, but God sometimes walks us through the valleys because He knows we need valleys to get to the higher ground, the depth of relationship that He wants with us. This is a verse that we often share with people who are on the verge of passing away, because even in death, the follower of Jesus, death is not an end, but it's a doorway to a more deep and intimate relationship with Him that will continue for all eternity in heaven. Jesus is looking for us to be people who say in the valleys, God, this is really tough. We can admit that the valleys are tough, but to say to Him, God, I know in the end that the best way is to go through the valleys of life that you want me to go through. And that in the valleys that we would realize that we need to be dependent on Him and learn from Him and follow Him in those. And it's not until we've walked through oftentimes the valleys of life that our dependence in God grows to where He really wants it to be. And so I just want to encourage you in the moments here as I'm talking to think back about a difficulty or a crisis maybe that you've had in your life, and then where you've seen God's faithfulness to you or your family in that. And wow, how that grows our faith in Jesus because of how He's gotten us through that. John 16:33 puts it this way when Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so how is it that God takes us through these valleys safely so that we will fear no evil even? It says no evil, not that we will have to fear sometimes, whatever, that we will fear no evil. And check it out, it says, for you are with me. God is with us in the good times, and He's with us in the valleys. And then it says that His rod and their shepherd's staff, they comfort me. Now, a modern day shepherd, to protect their sheep, they carry around an M16 assault rifle and hand grenades, okay? Not really. They do have guns, is what I've heard, though. But an ancient shepherd, or even in less developed parts today, they carry two things with them that are very important to them: their rod and their staff. Now, a rod looks more like what this shepherd is holding in this picture. It's like a stick. It might have kind of like a clubbed end on it. And they would learn how to throw that at predators, like with deadly velocity and accuracy to kill the predator. Or they would take that and beat a predator with that. And they would even use it when a sheep would be wayward. Maybe they'd be drinking water they weren't supposed to, or eating a weed that was poisonous they shouldn't. And they would take that and they'd kind of knock the sheep with that, knock some sense into the sheep, like, what you're doing is bad for you. And in the same way, God protects us with His rod, but also sometimes when we need some discipline, when we're getting off track, He kind of takes that thing and whacks us with us and disciplines us a little bit, because He knows that a little bit of pain from Him is better than the pain we're about to cause ourselves. And then the shepherd would also have had a staff that's very familiar to you that looks something like that. And with that staff, it's kind of the symbolism of care and concern for the sheep. He would take that staff and he would scoop up a baby sheep and return it to its mom that it was lost and separated from. Or when they were going on a new path that the herd had never been on before, a shepherd will take that and they will not beat, but they will gently nudge their sheep to go the right direction. Or sometimes the shepherd would just take that staff and he would just lean it up against the sheep so that the sheep is aware that, man, my shepherd is here and his care is great for me. You know, many people think that when we fail badly, when we sin as a child of God, that God is super frustrated with us, that he becomes disgusted, that he becomes fed up, that he's through with us when we mess up, even furious with us. I just want to encourage you that that is not the heart of God. Sometimes God corrects us with his rod to bring us back a little bit, but other times he gently nudges us with his staff. But God's heart is to always restore us back to him. There is no limit to how much God will do this in our lives. It's amazing. He is a good shepherd. Verse 5 continues like this: you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Now, in reading about sheep for today, I learned that sheep have all kinds of natural enemies. Of course, there's wild animals, bears, and mountain lions, and stuff like that. They would seek to kill them. There's certain weeds that they would eat. There's certain one kind that if they just take a bite or two of it, it paralyzes them and literally kills them. There's nothing they can do about it. There's these parasites that sheep are known to get that, this is kind of gross, but I'll tell you anyway. They fly into their nose, and the fly lands eggs, and then the eggs hatch. And it's almost lunchtime. And then these worms crawl out of these eggs, and they go up into the sheep's head. It just messes with the sheep. Like, it literally drives them crazy. And this can spread through the whole flock pretty quickly and destroy the whole flock. There's so many predators, so many enemies that sheep have. And what a good shepherd will do is he will go ahead of his sheep in those summer months when they're up in the mountains, and he's taking them up there to find that best food. And he will prepare a table, get that, for them. And he will go and he will look for rocks and places that predators will try to hide, and he'll scope those out so he can be aware of those when later on he brings the flock by there. He will literally spend days on end on his hand and knees pulling out weeds, those poisonous weeds, so that their sheep don't even have to worry about eating them or not. He will anoint his sheep's head with oil so that those parasites won't fly into their nose and eventually cause their death. He will prepare the table for his sheep in the presence of their enemies. You know, as followers of Jesus, I think if we're fully living for God, there's going to be times where we have enemies. People who look at our lifestyle and say, that is weird, that is wrong, that is whatever. More and more as our culture is veering away from Christian morality, I think this is going to become the case more and more for us as Christians. So what is our response to this? As we begin to be people who offend people in culture don't like our viewpoints as Christians. Well, I think a few things for the Christian, the follower of Jesus, is this. Our role is to be filled with grace and truth. Our role is to pray for those who persecute us and to show mercy even for our enemies. And then what is God's role in this? Well, in these interactions, like this verse says, God will go ahead of us and he will prepare a table for us. In the end, we know that God is going to judge and with truth all of his enemies. But check this out. God is also a God who, even for his enemies, loved them to the extent of death, even death on a cross. By the way, you and I, no matter how good or close to Jesus we are now, we were all at one point enemies of God. And I'm thankful that he treats us in love. God will prepare a table for us in the presence of our enemies. And then the last verse ends like this: surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And throughout these first 5 verses, we've read about all the benefits of being a sheep under God's shepherding care. And then we read here, check this out, that we will enjoy these benefits all of the days of our life as followers of Jesus. And then it doesn't end there. They continue through all eternity in heaven as we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Wow, that's awesome. The phrase that's here, follow me, can better be translated, track me down. It's as if God's love, God's care, desire to be shepherd and care for our lives is so great that he is going to track us down. Like, it's going to be hard, if not impossible, for us to outrun these blessings of God in our lives. That's the kind of God that he is. Psalm 23. And if it wasn't rich enough, if it wasn't full of meaning enough, if the Old Testament would have just ended there, it would have been amazing enough. But 1,000 years after David wrote this psalm, Jesus comes along and he comes on the scene and he becomes the fulfillment of Psalm 23, when in John 10 he says this, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me. And I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus is the only one who've experienced life not only as the shepherd, but the sheep. And although he was God in a perfect condition, would have never had to leave heaven, angels worshiping all the time, he said, to reach people, I want to become a sheep. But unlike us, he lived a perfect life. When we were scurrying around, we were fighting against God, we were doing our own thing, Jesus didn't do any of that. He fully obeyed God, lived a perfect life. As he got to the end of his life, because he was perfect, he was able to die on a cross to restore our relationship to him and God the Father. And then he didn't stay dead there, though, either, to prove that what he said was real. He rose again from the dead that you and I could put our faith and belief in him. And I wonder if you're here this morning, have you believed in that message, the gospel message? Have you put your faith in Jesus Christ as your good shepherd ever before? If not, today's the day to tell God, God, I want that. I want that kind of shepherd-sheep relationship with you. And for the majority of you, my guess is that you're here and that you've already begun that kind of a relationship with God. And the question for you is this: are you willing to put your will under the shepherd's will and align your life so that every moment of every day is totally lived how he wants you to live your life? He's the good shepherd. And even though that seems a little scary to trust him in that way, he is trustworthy to do that. Well, as we close, we've talked about so much, so many different verses today. Maybe a lot is jumbled in your mind. You probably forget most of what I said. That's okay. But I do want to give you just a moment here before I pray to talk to God a little bit and say, God, what do you want me to remember? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to be walking out of here thankful for this morning? And so I want you just to talk to God and say, what jumps out to you about this message today? And then I'll close you off in prayer in just a moment after that. You go ahead and talk to God. God, thank you that even though we are dumb sheep, you are an amazing shepherd, one worthy of putting our complete trust in. And so I pray for each of us that what you spoke to us about today, that we would live it out or talk to somebody or just have this in our mind or whatever it is you're calling us to do, that we would be faithful to obey you and be not just hearers but doers of your word. Give us your Holy Spirit power to do that, and to not stay comfortable with where we're at in our faith. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, it's been great being with you this morning. A couple things I want to tell you is, one, if you had a question about today or wanted to talk to somebody about something or wanted prayer in your life, if you just follow these doors out the back to the prayer room, somebody's there who would love to pray with you. Next week, I want to invite you back, and we'll welcome our lead pastor, Mark Ashton, who will be back to finish up our Psalm series, okay? Well, that's all we have for today. Thanks for worshiping with us. Have a great week.